Larry Alabama Baptist Church, our online Sunday school class. In our study about heaven, we started several weeks ago. We got about 2 more weeks ago. And bring up to speak from last week. Last week we were looking at what we remember, what those of us on earth remember about earth and heaven. One of the things that we studied was they're going to remember the persecution. For example, our text was out of Revelation chapter 6, verses 9 to 11. It says, when the Lamb opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain for the word of God and for the witness they had borne. They cried out with a loud voice, O sovereign Lord, holy and true, how long before you judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell on the earth? Then they were each given a white robe and told to rest a little longer, till the number of their fellow servants and their brothers should be complete, who were killed and they themselves had been. So we looked at those in heaven would, we point out here, would remember the persecution a few weeks back, because this plays into our study this morning, that death is the great equalizer. It comes to all, rich or poor, black or white, Democrat or Republican, American, French, whatever you want to put in there, it comes to all of us. And after that, after death comes the great white throne judgment at the end of time, which it seems like one of the biggest fears when people respond to that question is not facing God's judgment. For example, between about Billy Graham and former President Johnson back when he was still president. Billy Graham was visiting President Johnson at that particular time, and they were driving around President Johnson's ranch in Texas. They came to a spot where President Johnson's mother and father were buried. And as the story goes, President Johnson turned to Billy Graham and asked the question, would he ever see his mother and father again? And here's what Billy Graham responded. It says, well, Mr. President, if you're a Christian and they were Christians, then someday you'll have a great homecoming. And so that seems to be a question even our president had some time ago. But we looked at the book of Hebrews where we started this morning, suggests here, if we look in, for example, in Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1 and 2, it says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, this thing that hinders, sin that so clearly tangles. Let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set for him endured the cross, scorned its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinful men, so you will not grow weary and lose heart. And so there in the book of Hebrews suggests, if you read that text, it kind of suggests almost like a heavenly stadium. If you've ever been in this stadium, you recognize that it's full with thousands of people. Generally I think about when I watch Alabama play on TV, and I've never been to Tuscaloosa in that stadium, but as the camera pans around the stadium, you see thousands upon thousands of people surrounding the field there in Tuscaloosa. And so when you look at the whole, at that particular time at, say, Tuscaloosa, the fans are what? They're focused on the team. They're focused on what the team is doing or not doing. But they're focused down on the field of the team. It appears here as we look at this particular verse in Hebrews, it's almost a reference back to a stadium in the sense that there's a group of, having a group of individuals who are spectators, but they're not focused, for example, on what you might think they're focused on. They're not looking at God, neither are they looking at one another. What they appear to be focused on is they're focused on us here on earth, what's going on here on earth, and what's happening here on earth. And so that's why we have entitled today's lesson, A Royal Cheering Section in Heaven. So we look at this, the spectators that constitute what we call a great cloud of witnesses, as the text appears to say. And as we run a Christian race, again, a kind of a reference to a marathon, as we run the Christian life, this particular verses here seem to be saying at least two thoughts about these verses as we look at this concept of these witnesses. First of all, the verse may be saying these witnesses are examples of how they live, and we should imitate what they did. How they interested, oh, finishing this Christian life, finishing this Christian race. That seems to be the emphasis here as we look at this particular text over in Hebrews. Now, it makes us have to stop and ask a particular question. What is a running a good Christian race for a Christian life? What does it look like? And so there are several texts I want to share with you. I won't have time to look them up, but I'll share what they are if you care to look them up later. In Acts chapter 20, verse 24, one of the concepts that says you run a good race, you're telling about the gospel of God's grace. You're telling others about Jesus. That says you're running a good race, for example. 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 24 and 25, you remain faithful as a Christian. So that says you're running a true Christian race. You're running it faithfully. And Philippians 3, 12 and 14, you keep moving ahead. You do not stop. You're pressing onward. You're pressing forward to the goal, which is heaven. So those texts are Acts 20, verse 24, 1 Corinthians 9, 24 and 25, Philippians 3, 12 through 14. So that's those particular texts. Now, another thing that Paul challenged in 2 Timothy chapter 4, verses 6 and 8, Paul challenges Timothy to the Christian and to us today also. So he challenges Timothy there to do three things. If you care to look that up, it's in 2 Timothy chapter 4, verses 6 through 8. He tells him, keep your head in all situations, be calm. He tells Timothy, who's a young pastor, things go awry in the church, things go awry in your community, persecution sets in, problems in the church are occurring, keep your head in these situations, remain calm. Number two, he says, understand, endure hardships. The Christian, we're going to face hardships. We talked about last week, the persecution in various countries around the world, especially talked about North Korea, other countries that we referenced last Sunday. Number three, do the work that God has assigned to you. Do the Christian work God's assigned. That's over in 2 Timothy verses 4, 6 through 8. Now, interesting concept about this says we're compassed or encircled with a great amount of witnesses, and it points the direction you're facing. But it gives you bearing. It tells you which way north is, or east, west, or whatever it might be. So it's to give you bearing is what it's about. So we talk about who are these witnesses. We said they're there. They're in a crowd, they're surrounding, in a sense they're a witness, a crowd surrounding us. But who are these witnesses? Well, there are several possible answers. One is that they're the loved ones who have gone on before us. President Johnson referred to his mother and dad. If they were believers, they'd be there ahead of, I should say, a hall of faith. Matter of fact, put it that way. So let's look at Abel. Abel was the son, Abel and Cain were the sons of Adam and Eve. And it tells us, for example, in Hebrews 11:4, that he offered a more acceptable offering. And what happened after that? Abel paid by that offering by his life. We find that, go back and read in Genesis, in a sense, I guess, Cain was jealous of how God responded to Abel's offering compared to his own offering. And we find that the first murder is recorded there as Cain strikes down his brother, it says, out in the field, struck him down and killed him. So he's one of those heavenly martyrs that's cheering us on as we look here in the book of Hebrews chapter 11. And so he gave the very best that he had to the Lord, even though it was going to cost him his life. So that brings up some questions that I had to ask myself. Perhaps you need to ask yourself. Are we willing to give all, even our lives, to serve the Lord? That's what worth that. And the answer, of course, is yes. So we find there that the first one listed there in this book of the Hall of Fame is Abel. The second one is Enoch, and that's in Hebrews 11:5. It says, by faith Enoch was taken from this life, so he did not experience death. He could not be found because God had taken him away. For before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God. Without faith, it's impossible to please God, because anyone who comes with him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. So what we find out, it stands out here about, when I look at this whole process, he was taken because he was what? He pleased God. It tells you right away he's not a people pleaser. You see, there's a thing we cannot do in this life, especially as a believer. We can't both please God and please people. There's a paradox between the two. We're pleasing Jennifer, we're pleasing people. We're going to find out we're not pleasing God. And so we have to focus down, when Enoch did here, on pleasing God. He experienced death. I guess you call it was translated. He went from being alive, he didn't go through the process of death. He just simply went here, went on to heaven with God. And so he did not experience death. He's taken up, he should not see death, it says. So he's focused on God in heaven, not focused on here on the earth and the people of this earth. The third one we find is in Hebrews 11:7. By faith Noah, when he warned him things not yet seen, in holy fear built an ark to save his family. By those who walk by and say, here is this crazy Noah building a ship. It's hundreds of miles from the sea. And they took him as a man who was crazy, didn't have any sense. I'm sure they changed their mind when the heavens opened and the water came down. It rained for 40 days, and they all died in a flood. By then it was too late for them to change their mind. They went out unconverted. They went on not believing in God and believing what Noah had to say about God. And so we find him listed there in verses 11, 17 as the great hall of faith. Number 4 and 5 out of the 8 we find in verses 8 and 12. By faith, Abraham, when he called to go to a place he later received as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not of the same. They had Cain's descendants as numerous as the stars of the sky, and countless as the sands. Everything he had, and he traveled hundreds of miles to a place where God said, this is where you are to now live. He did not know where he was going when he left Ur of Chaldeans. He only knew where, when he arrived, that God said, this is the place I've set aside for you and your descendants. So he told him to leave Haran and to go there, and he simply headed out there. He obeyed. Now, we find later on, as I said about Sarah, she simply obeyed too. Sarah is promised the impossible. By the time that Isaac is born, both Abraham and are old, forth from her, fathered by Abraham. So she had to wait 3 long years for the promise to occur. And so their faith was tested, their faith was confirmed, and eventually have a child they name Isaac. And that's what it talks about. Out of his chain would come all the descendants that would eventually be the Jews of today. Out of that same chain would come Jesus Christ himself. Same chain would come Jesus Christ himself as a descendant of the heaven and the sands on the seashore. Abraham obeys again. He takes the wood, he takes Isaac, and he heads to Mount Moriah, believing that God would provide a sacrifice, believing that if he did indeed sacrifice Isaac, somehow God would resurrect him or bring him back, or he'd still have the blessings of his children. Of course, if you read that whole story over in Genesis, you find God intervened about the time Abraham's going to kill Isaac and stops him, provides a ram that's trapped, its horns are Of course, he blesses Jacob over Esau. Esau was the firstborn who should have got the blessing and worship as he leaned on the top of his staff. So that's listed there also. So Jacob and Rebekah, tricked Isaac, but again, God brought it about what he had originally planned. Number 7, this is in verses 22. It tells us, by faith, Joseph, when he was near, spoke about the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt, gave instruction about his bones. Now, what basically said is, when you leave Egypt, take my bones. He died years before the actual exodus takes place. He says, as he's dying, when you leave, be sure and take my bones with you. So he tells him to take it with him when he goes. And so he's concerned about him being buried in God's promised land and not remaining there in Egypt. He knew God was going to bless the Israelites. He knew God would set them free one day, return to the land. He wanted to be sure that even though he'd be long dead by the time God's plan goes into play, that he was a part of that plan by his bones going back. He did not want to remain in Egypt. He wanted to be carried back to the homeland of his people. And of course, number 8 is Moses. This is in 11:23 to 28. It says, by faith, Moses' parents hid him 3 months after he was born, because he was no very child. They were afraid of the king's edict. The edict is all male Hebrew child were to be death as soon as they were born. By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than enjoy the pleasure of sin for a short time. Regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as a greater value than the treasure of Egypt, because he was looking ahead to his reward. By faith, he left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He persevered because he saw him who was invisible. By faith, he kept the Passover, sprinkled the blood, destroyer of the firstborns, would not touch the firstborn of Israel. It goes on to describe how they, by faith, they passed through the Red Sea, and so on forth. So Moses there saw what was going on. Rather than maintain his position as basically adopted son of Pharaoh, prince in his own right, access to the treasures of Egypt, part of the royalty at that particular time, he gave all that up, all that prestige and all that power, to be identified with God and God's people. Now, let me quickly say there's nothing wrong with money. That's not the intent of what I'm talking about here today. We need it, to get by in life. We need to take care of ourselves and our family and those things around us. But he did not see it as the most important thing in life. He saw following God, doing what God called him to do, far more important than amassing any kind of wealth. So money is important, but we have to understand its limits. It's only good for here on this earth. You're not going to take anything with you when you go. I don't know way you could ever take any money with you. If somebody went to your bank, if you had much money, went to your bank account, stuffed it in your casket and buried it with you. But it'll be no good to you or anybody else. Money has only use for the world we're in. It has no use for the world that's coming, the world after this life. Please handle us and let us run with perseverance the race marked before us. This is the verse right here. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. So the one who's cheering us on, having looked that way, among all those witnesses, looking about what we're doing here as we live this Christian life, the epitome of that spectators cheering us on would be Jesus himself. The author calls it here the founder and perfecter of our faith. So in essence, we really run for an audience of one. The rest of us might be there to see us, as I named off those individuals. But the one we actually run for, everything in Christian life, we're running a marathon or running a race to the finish, is Jesus himself. He is the great founder and perfecter of our faith. It's almost like Christ says to us from heaven, in the sense of it, come on, keep going, you'll make it, follow me. Now, we read you a text out of the book of Revelations. This is a letter that Jesus, John writes down when Jesus refers to the churches there, and he's talking about the church of Philadelphia. It's in Revelations 3, chapter 11 and 12. It says this. So no man will take your crown. Him who overcomes I will make a pillar in the temple of my God. Never again will he have it. Will he leave it, excuse me. I will write on him the name of my God, the name of the city of my God, the New Jerusalem, which is coming from my God, and I will also write on him my new name. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. This is the church of Philadelphia, and that reference he talks about there, and he writes to the church. So he's telling them, you get a new name, my name will be written on you. You'll always be in the temple of God. You'll be like a column there in that temple. And here's the point of what I'm talking about then. We don't know when life is going to end. We don't know when that's going to happen. You know, we're going to be a number of those in heaven, and that heavenly state. I'm going to use that kind of example, watching what's going on here on earth. We don't know that. And in contrast, we don't know part of those believers who do not trust Jesus Christ as personal Savior. You don't know when life's going to end for you. And if you die that way apart from Christ, then you're going to be assigned to hell with the devil and his demons. You don't know. As I said sometime, my point is this. We're all going to die. You're going to be part of that heavenly crowd that's cheering on those that are still here on earth. Heaven, should I die when I understand this text, I'll be here to cheer on my daughters and sons and granddaughters and grandsons who will remain behind me. But there's also a second group. If you don't know Christ, your personal Savior, you die before without receiving Christ as Savior, you'll be assigned to hell. So you won't be a part of that cheering crowd in heaven. You're part of that tormenting crowd that's hell. It's your choice. We talked about it last week. You make the choice about where you go. God set out a way for you to go, a way to be forgiven. It goes to the foot of the cross. And failing to go to the foot of the cross, all it's left for God to do. And we look at it next week, to open the books up and bring judgment down upon us. Either we are part of Christ or not part of Christ. So you think about what we talked about this morning. What group will you be a part of if you died right now? Would you be part of the group in heaven cheering us on who's remaining behind of your loved ones? Or would you be part of the group that goes to the devil's hell and in torment? You think about that and you make an appropriate decision this morning. You have a God